Those were the words Renwick Hale, the 41-year-old husband of Avery Renwick Hale, spoke in front of her mother's open casket, while her father's monitor beeped twice in the hallway outside, and a woman named Desiree stood close enough to him that their shoulders touched. "You are always too small for the life I'm building. I need someone who can stand in the light with me." Avery Dolan Hale, the 37-year-old wife of Renwick and the silent majority owner of Northgate Publishing Group, a privately held Canadian media company valued at $420 million, stood between the floral arrangement her mother had chosen herself 3 weeks earlier, and a room full of people who loved her mother and did not yet understand what they were witnessing. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She looked at Renwick, then at Desiree Krantz, the 33-year-old senior publicist for Northgate's flagship literary division, and asked one quiet question. "You chose today." Renwick walked out with Desiree under the same umbrella. He believed he had removed a quiet, grieving wife from a life she was too modest to deserve. What he did not know was that the company paying his salary, approving his contract, funding his career, and holding his professional reputation in its files was owned by the woman he had just abandoned at her mother's funeral. Stay until the end, because the wife he humiliated at her mother's casket is the same woman who owns the room that undoes him. The elevator inside Northgate Publishing Group's downtown Toronto headquarters required a badge scan, a 4-digit code, and a secondary confirmation for anything above the 14th floor. Most employees knew about the first 2 requirements. Very few knew about the third. Avery Dolan Hale had memorized all 3 before she was 22. She was the daughter of Claudette Dolan, the 68-year-old founder of Northgate Publishing Group, and Ellsworth Dolan, the 71-year-old chairman emeritus, who had retired from active management 4 years earlier but had never fully left the building. Her name did not appear on any public-facing document connected to the company. She was listed in external communications as a legacy consultant and family liaison, a title her mother had designed specifically to let Avery move freely through the company without attracting attention. The arrangement had begun 12 years ago when Claudette first noticed that powerful people behaved differently around money. They smiled wider, they moved closer, they stopped being honest. So Claudette had placed Avery's controlling stake inside the Dolan Family Trust, sealed it behind corporate counsel and inheritance protections, and told her daughter one thing: let them meet who you are before they discover what you hold. Avery had followed that advice for 12 years, through a graduate degree in media law, through a marriage to Renwick Hale, a rising editorial strategist, who told her once in a small Halifax restaurant that he did not care about wealth, only about building something that mattered. Through years of watching Renwick's ambition grow faster than his gratitude. Through the morning, she found the text messages. Through the evening, she sat in her car outside the hospital and decided not to confront him yet because her mother had asked her not to bring chaos into the room where she was dying. That was 3 weeks ago. Now Claudette Dolan was in a casket made of pale birchwood, and Renwick Hale was in the parking lot with his publicist. Petra Ashby, the 44-year-old chief operations officer of Northgate Publishing Group, and one of 4 people who knew Avery's true position within the company, found her in the family waiting room after the service. Petra carried 2 paper cups of tea. She set one down beside Avery without asking. For a moment, neither woman spoke. "You do not have to go back to the office today," Petra said. Avery looked at the far wall. "I am not going back to the office. I am going to the office. There is a difference." Petra's face changed. She had worked for Claudette Dolan for 19 years. She understood exactly what that sentence meant. Oswald Frey, the 58-year-old corporate counsel for the Dolan Family Trust, and the man who had drafted every legal wall protecting Avery's identity inside the company, arrived 20 minutes later. He was a quiet man with careful eyes who had stood behind Claudette at every difficult board meeting and behind Avery at every difficult moment since. He did not shake hands. He sat across from Avery and placed a sealed envelope on the low table between them. "Your mother signed the final activation documents the morning before she lost consciousness," he said. "The trust transfers full executive authority to you effective today." Avery did not open the envelope. Oswald looked at her hands. She had not yet removed her wedding ring. "There is no timeline requirement," he said. Avery looked at the envelope. "My mother built this company for 40 years. She built it so that writers who were ignored could find homes for their work, and so that people like Renwick could not strip those homes away from them." She looked up. "There is a very specific timeline." Beside the wall, Marisol Vance, the 39-year-old head of internal security and compliance for Northgate, and the 4th member of the small circle who knew Avery's real authority, entered quietly. Her expression was controlled, but her eyes were not. "There is something you need to know," Marisol said. "It can wait until tomorrow if you need." Tell me now, Avery said. Marisol held up her tablet. 3 days ago, while you were at the hospital, Renwick submitted a formal proposal to the Acquisitions Board recommending that Northgate divest from 3 of its literary imprints and redirect those resources toward commercial licensing and brand partnerships. Avery looked at the tablet. The proposal also named Desiree Krantz as co-lead on the restructuring initiative, Marisol continued. It was submitted through the editorial director's office and was already in circulation among senior staff before the family notification protocols were activated. Oswald's pen stopped moving against his notepad. He submitted it 3 days ago, Avery said quietly. 3 days ago, her mother had still been breathing. He had sat in the hospital waiting room, scrolled his phone, and left to answer a call that lasted 40 minutes. He submitted it 3 days ago. The drive from the funeral home to Northgate's headquarters took 14 minutes in quiet afternoon traffic. Avery sat in the back seat of Oswald's car and looked out the window at the city her mother had loved. Claudette had come to Toronto from New Brunswick at 19, with 2 suitcases and a novel she had been writing since she was 14. No publisher wanted it. She should start Northgate Publishing Group at 26 in a rented room with a second-hand printer and a list of writers who had been turned down by larger houses. The novel was never published. Claudette had said once that it did not need to be. It had already done its job. Avery closed her eyes. She could still feel the hospital room. The particular silence of it, the light from the window, making her mother's hair look silver and soft. Ellsworth holding Claudette's hand and not speaking because there was nothing left to say that touch had not already said more clearly. She had left that room to take a call from the school board about her daughter's spelling test results. When she came back, her mother's chest had gone still. She did not blame herself for missing it, but she carried it. Inside the Northgate building, the editorial floor was subdued. Word had spread through the building that Claudette Dolan had died that morning. The receptionist at the main desk looked up when Avery arrived and pressed her lips together in the way people did when they wanted to express something that did not have a clean word. Avery thanked her and kept walking. She did not go to the executive floor. She went to the archival reading room on the 9th floor, a quiet space lined with the original galleys and manuscript boxes from the first decade of Northgate's history. Her mother had kept it exactly as it was. No renovation, no modernization, just the same pale oak shelves, the same soft lamp in the corner, and a framed photograph above the door of 23 writers, standing in a Halifax community centre in 1987, smiling like people who had just been told for the first time that their voices were worth something. Avery sat in the chair at the centre table and placed her mother's envelope in front of her. She opened it. The letter inside was 3 pages in Claudette's handwriting, which had remained remarkably steady until the very end. The first line read, "If you are reading this in grief, read it slowly. If you are reading this in anger, read it twice." Avery read it 4 times. The letter did not speak about Renwick by name. Claudette had not needed to. She had seen the change in him over the past 2 years, the way his handshake had grown more practiced, the way he stopped asking Avery questions and started asking her for connections. Claudette had told Avery once, during a quiet dinner the previous Christmas, that a man who stopped being curious about his wife had already left her in the way that mattered most. The letter said instead, "This company is not a crown, Avery. It is a shelter. Your grandfather built the first page. I built the first room. You will build whatever comes next. But protect it from people who confuse ambition with ownership, especially the ones who smile while they do it." In his office on the 15th floor, Renwick Hale reviewed the guest list for the Northgate Literary Awards Gala, which was scheduled for 11 days away. It was the most prominent event in the company's annual calendar, attended by authors, editors, industry partners, literary agents, booksellers, and press from across the country. Renwick had positioned himself over the past 18 months as the internal face of the gala. He had proposed the guest curation committee, placed himself at the top of it, and made sure that Desiree's publicity firm had the primary media contract. He was aware, vaguely, that there were whispers about the proposal he had submitted to Acquisitions, but whispers at Northgate usually resolved themselves through an editorial meeting and a revised memo. He was not particularly concerned. His phone buzzed. "Desiree. Everyone is asking about tonight. Are we still on?" Renwick looked at the window. His wife's mother had died that morning. His wife had looked at him in a church waiting room with an expression he could not fully name. He had signed a piece of paper his lawyer had prepared and handed it to her there, because his lawyer had told him the cleanest time to serve divorce papers was before a person had regrouped. He looked back at his phone. "Yes," he typed. "Give me an hour." Marisol called at 7 that evening. The call was brief. Renwick's access to the restricted Acquisitions file had been used 3 more times since the funeral. Desiree had been granted elevated editorial floor access through a visitor credential that was supposed to expire at 5 p.m., but had been renewed by Renwick's assistant at 4:58. A freelance writer named Brogan Ash, 29 years old, and recently dropped by Northgate's literary fiction imprint, had sent an email to 3 board members suggesting that the Dolan family's stake in the company was essentially dormant and that new leadership was needed. Avery listened to all of this. Then she asked, "Who drafted Brogan's email?" Marisol paused. "The metadata points to a device connected to Desiree Krantz's personal account." Avery looked at the photograph above the archival room door. 23 writers in a Halifax community center. "Preserve everything," she said. "Do not touch his access yet." The building that hosted the Northgate Literary Awards Gala stood on the edge of the waterfront, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and a view of Lake Ontario that made the whole room feel enormous on clear nights. Inside, the walls were lined with enlarged book covers. Waitstaff moved between tables with canapes and sparkling water. A string quartet played softly near the entrance. Renwick arrived at 6:40 with Desiree on his arm. He wore a dark suit, she wore emerald green. The look between them when they reached the step and repeat banner was not subtle. Several editorial staff who had known Avery for years looked away. Everard Moss, the 62-year-old chair of Northgate's board of directors, and a man who had served under Claudette Dolan for 14 years, stood near the bar with a glass of water. He watched Renwick cross the room with the expression of someone doing arithmetic they did not enjoy. Beside him stood Cressida Lane, the 55-year-old ethics officer of the board, who had received 2 formal complaints about Renwick's acquisitions proposal before the funeral and had held them pending the trust activation. Renwick shook hands with board members, smiled for a journalist from a national literary magazine, and found his seat at the second table from the stage. He looked once toward the entrance. No sign of Avery. He looked at Desiree. She touched his hand. He leaned back. By the time the overhead lights dimmed and Northgate's master of ceremonies opened the evening, Renwick had already accepted that Avery was not coming. She was probably at home. She was probably with her father. She was probably, as she had always been, somewhere quiet, somewhere small, somewhere that wasn't here. He adjusted his jacket and waited for his name to be called. Avery arrived through the catering entrance at 6:55. She wore a navy dress that her mother had bought for her 2 years earlier and never seen her wear. She had not meant to wear it tonight. She had taken it from the garment bag that morning without thinking and only realized what it was when she was already in the car. She kept it on. Oswald walked beside her. Petra followed 2 steps behind. Marisol moved along the perimeter. They had gone over the evening sequence 3 times in the archival reading room the night before. They were not rushing. Near the kitchen hallway, a young man stood with a folder clutched under his arm. He had a lanyard around his neck that said Rutrier, Jack. His name was Brogan Ash, and he had not been invited through the official guest list. Oswald had called him that afternoon with a different invitation. Avery stopped when she saw him. She remembered the email. She also remembered the manuscript he had submitted to Northgate's literary fiction imprint 18 months earlier. She had read 20 pages of it in the archival room the previous evening while Oswald reviewed documents. The pages were good, uncomfortably good, the kind of good that explained why the rejection had felt suspicious. "You came," she said. He nodded, not quite meeting her eyes. "I almost did not." She looked at the folder under his arm, the manuscript. He handed it to her. She held it carefully. "My mother would have fought for this," Avery said, "and I intend to understand why she did not get the chance." Brogan's throat moved. He looked at the floor. Inside the main hall, the gala proceeded on schedule. The Master of Ceremonies announced 3 literary awards. The winners thanked their editors. The applause was warm and real. Renwick's acquisitions proposal was not on the agenda, but he had already begun floating the restructuring language in private conversations at the table, mentioning it casually to a board-adjacent director named Harwick Fenn and to a streaming partnership representative who had no reason to know the proposal was already under internal review. At 7:42, the stage lights shifted. Everard Moss walked to the podium. He was not on the evening's program. The room noticed. "Good evening," he said. "Before we continue, Northgate Publishing Group wishes to make a brief statement on behalf of its controlling ownership authority." Renwick looked up from his champagne. A screen descended behind Everard. The Northgate logo appeared, followed by a different seal, the Dolan Family Trust seal. Renwick's hands stopped moving. The first document that appeared on the screen was a corporate governance notice. It was brief and clearly formatted. It noted that effective as of the morning of Claudette Dolan's passing, the Dolan Family Trust had activated full executive authority within Northgate Publishing Group, and that active chairwoman status had been confirmed and assumed by Avery Dolan Hale. The room shifted. Several people near the back turned to each other. A journalist reached for her phone. The next document was a financial compliance notice. It detailed a series of expense irregularities connected to the Northgate editorial strategy account, a luxury hotel booking charged to a conference development fund, publicist retainer fees paid to a firm with a conflict of interest, given the personal relationship between the lead publicist and a senior editorial employee, production meeting costs listed for meetings that had never appeared on any calendar. Renwick stood up. The third document was the acquisitions proposal he had submitted. Beside it was an annotated version prepared by the Ethics Office, flagging sections that contained misleading budget projections, unauthorized use of imprint performance data, and a recommendation structure that would have benefited the publicist's firm directly. Desiree gripped the armrest of her chair. The fourth document was a communication record, an email, with metadata, sent from a device connected to the publicist's personal account to the inbox of a writer who had been dropped from the literary imprint. The email had encouraged the writer to contact board members with concerns about the Dolan family's ownership relevance. Brogan Ash sat in the far corner of the room and did not look at the screen. He already knew what it said. Then Everard stepped aside and Avery Dolan Hale walked onto the stage. There was no dramatic entrance. She did not wait for the room to settle. She simply walked to the podium in her mother's dress and stood there, and the quiet that followed was not the quiet of shock alone. It was the quiet of recognition. She looked at the room. My mother built Northgate Publishing Group because she believed that a story in the wrong hands was worse than a story never told, she said. She spent 40 years ensuring that the writers in this room had somewhere to bring their work that would not strip them of it. Her eyes moved to Renwick. He did not look away. She gave him that. This company has formal proceedings beginning tonight, she continued. Executive access for Renwick Hale has been suspended pending review. The publicist contract with Krantz Strategic Communications is terminated effective immediately. The acquisitions proposal submitted earlier this month is withdrawn and under Ethics Committee investigation. Outside legal counsel has been retained. A woman near the back of the room began to cry quietly. Avery did not know who she was. She thought it might be one of the literary fiction authors whose imprint Renwick's proposal had recommended closing. There was one more thing. Avery looked toward the corner where Brogan Ash was sitting. Brogan Ash submitted a manuscript to Northgate's literary fiction imprint. 18 months ago, she said. It was declined without editorial review at a stage that should have included one. The company has reviewed the manuscript under independent assessment and is extending a formal offer of acquisition tonight. Mr. Ash will be contacted by a senior editor tomorrow morning. The room began to applaud. It started at the back and moved forward, not the practiced applause of ceremony, but the kind that comes from people who have been waiting for a sentence they needed to hear. Renwick stood in the applause. Like a man in rain, he had not been told was coming. Avery had not written the confrontation with Renwick into the evening's plan. She had not written it out because she had not known whether she would want it. He found her in the corridor outside the main hall at 8:15. He had lost the smooth composure she had watched him cultivate for years. His jacket was slightly askew. He was holding nothing. "You own this," he said. The question came out hollow. Avery looked at him. "I protect it. My mother owned it. Now I protect it." He looked at the floor, then back at her. "You never told me." She thought about all the things she could have said to that. She thought about the Halifax restaurant and the way he had held her hand across the table in the early years, before applause started to matter more to him than accuracy. She thought about the hospital waiting room and the 40-minute phone call. She thought about her mother's chest going still in a room Avery had stepped out of for 12 minutes. "You never asked," she said. "You decided what I was and stopped looking." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Avery, we can." She shook her head. "Not tonight." She looked at the corridor wall, where a framed first edition of a Northgate novel hung at eye level. The author had been 24 when it was published. She had been told by 4 larger houses that her subject matter was too quiet for mainstream readers. Tonight she was one of the most translated Canadian authors of her generation. "You can speak with Oswald about the legal proceedings," Avery said. "He will make sure everything is handled correctly." She walked back into the room. He did not follow. Later, Petra found her near the window that overlooked the water. The gala had mostly emptied. Staff were folding tablecloths and collecting glassware. The string quartet had packed their instruments. The lake sat flat and dark beyond the glass, the city lights moving across its surface. "How are you?" Petra asked. Avery considered the question. She was tired in a way that went below the body. She was still wearing her mother's dress. Her father had called her twice since the service, and she had not yet listened to the voicemails, because she knew his voice would finish the thing she had been holding together carefully all day. I miss her, Avery said. Petra did not say anything that tried to improve on that. She simply stood there. After a long moment, she said she would have been very still tonight. You know how she got when she was most proud? Just very still and very quiet. Avery did. She smiled. Her mother had watched the most important moments of her life from the back of rooms, arms folded, not smiling but present in a way that was somehow larger than the whole space around her. She watched the lake. I kept waiting for someone to tell me I had no right to be here, Avery said, even tonight. Petra looked at her. Who would say that? Avery shook her head. No one. That was my own voice. In the weeks that followed, the proceedings moved quietly but completely. Renwick Hale's suspension became a termination after the Financial Compliance Review confirmed the expense irregularities. The publicist's contract dissolution was followed by a civil claim for conflict of interest and breach of disclosure. The board's ethics committee filed a full report on the acquisitions proposal, which was shared with senior staff and publishing partners. Brogan Ash signed a contract with Northgate's literary fiction imprint. His editor called him on a Tuesday afternoon and told him the novel was extraordinary and would be published the following spring. He called Avery to tell her. She was in the archival reading room when her phone rang. Thank you, he said. She looked at the photograph above the door. 23 writers in Halifax. Every one of them had been told their work was not enough. Do not thank me, she said. Write the next one. Ellsworth Dolan came to the office for the first time since Claudette's funeral on a Thursday morning in early November. He was 71 and moved slowly now, but he knew every floor of the building and greeted every person he passed by name. Avery met him in the archival reading room. He stood in the doorway for a long moment and looked at the shelves, at the framed photograph, at his daughter sitting at the center table with a manuscript open in front of her. He did not comment on any of the public events. He did not ask about Renwick. He sat down in the chair across from her and said, "Your mother would have eaten lunch by now. Have you eaten lunch?" Avery laughed. She genuinely laughed, and it surprised her because she had not realized there was laughter available. "No," she said. Ellsworth unzipped the canvas bag he was carrying and produced 2 containers of soup from the deli 2 blocks away. He placed one in front of her. She looked at it. "Your grandmother kept the company books in a tin box under the kitchen table," Ellsworth said. "Your mother kept them in a shoebox for 3 years before she could afford filing cabinets." He looked around the room. Rooms like this do not happen because someone had the right idea. They happen because someone refused to stop. Avery held the soup container in both hands. The warmth moved through her palms. She thought about the morning of the gala, standing in the catering corridor in her mother's dress, holding Brogan's manuscript, knowing that the room on the other side of the wall still did not know her name. She thought about her mother's letter. Let them meet who you are before they discover what you hold. She thought about what it had cost to follow that instruction, and what it had meant to finally be done following it. Outside the window, November light moved across the tops of the buildings. She opened the manuscript in front of her, picked up her pen, and began to read. Some women are quiet because they are afraid. Some women are quiet because they have already decided. The difference lives in what they do when the room finally goes still enough to hear them. Subscribe for more stories, and comment shelter if you believe that what someone builds from love should never be taken by someone who only arrived for the applause.